a cause does not become sacred unless blood has been spilled, unless men and women have given their lives to that cause. And it is the blood of martyrs that confers to the cause its legitimacy, its authority, and its power over us. And once blood is spilled, of course, more blood is called. I mean, you have revenge, killing and dying, and of course, offering your individual property, you know, women offering their gold bracelets and jewelry and so on to finance a war effort, but it's something that you've seen everywhere. And it is a sacred duty, and abandoning the cause, you know, when so many people have died for it, is just impossible. I mean, it would, you know, it would riddle you with shame and so on. So think of how many street names, you know, public squares, avenues, and so on, are named after people who have killed, you know, generals, ministers, and so on. They are our heroes. You know, they are the ones that, you know, children are taught about in school. They are the ones that, you know, operas and novels are written about, and so on. And it is these sort of, you know, people who have killed civilians, innocent civilians, as well as soldiers, who have been revolutionaries, who have, you know, plundered and so on. You have to accept that the cause was so high that all what they have done was justified. And you cannot renege on this. You cannot go back on this. You know, the Battle of Britain, Pearl Harbor, Auschwitz, the resistance, you know, our boys fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, all this is what the states is, you know, all states are built on. And how could we dare reject that legacy? So it is the burden of history that we carry on our shoulders, and it is difficult to, you know, shrug it off without shame and guilt and so on. So if your question is, how do I rationally refute a deep-seated conviction that has not been formed rationally, the answer is you cannot. Of course you cannot. You do not refute an ideology, as I was saying earlier. It is part of a worldview that people have received, were given at birth, and so far they have had little incentive to take the trouble and sometimes the risk of emancipating themselves. There are very few libertarians today for the same reason that there were very few atheists in the 17th century and very few socialists in the 19th century. A philosophy as ours of, you know, pure liberty goes against the grain of our society, and really you have nothing to gain professionally or otherwise. I mean, there's no money to make in, you know, libertarianism. There is no medal to earn. There is no glamour. There's not even dates. So, except that you are right. But as Voltaire quipped, I mean, it's dangerous to be right when the government is wrong. And there are, you know, very few libertarians. But what I'm going to say is that it doesn't matter. We don't care if there are very few libertarians. Numbers are not important here, because the revolution, you know, our revolution, won't happen because libertarian legions would storm the planet. So, if numbers don't matter, how, again, you know, libertarianism is going to spread? Well, in their own good time, and without libertarians having much to do about it, the scale will fall from people's eyes. They will become aware of what Hannah Arendt called the rape of reality by ideology. People will perceive that the ideology that they have been taught no longer gives account of a reality that they experience. And facts are stubborn. One day it dawns on men and women that reality is more real than what their authorities are telling them, and this is when the paradigm starts to shift. And libertarians' only responsibility at that stage is to have the new map ready. the map that offers our interpretation of the world, which is so much precise and gives account, you know, more faithful account of what's happening in the world. That is what an avant-garde does. I mean, an avant-garde simply is there to tell people when they no longer believe the ideology, the dominant ideology, the avant-garde tells them, well, look, this is the alternative. This is what works. And our responsibility is simply to be there to say, you know, this is what works. So what is the technological transformation that makes social democracy obsolete? And I think that, you know, I said it earlier, but I think Marx got that point right. It is technology and the conditions of production that dictate political structures. And the technologies that's facilitated the growth of nation states, the 18th and especially in the 19th century, these technologies have now reached their full development. And it is the internal contradiction of states, but actually the ideology, the technology that they themselves developed in order to consolidate, in order to expand their power, are now sort of turning around and becoming the technologies that are sapping, that are destroying that power. In word, I mean, let me look a bit at this. I mean, in the 19th century, states developed two or three big technologies: railroads, telegraphs, and highways in the 20th century. In other words, to project their power by moving rapidly on highways and railroads and so on, their police forces and their army, and with the telegraph to communicate very rapidly, you know, to the confines of the empire in order to maintain their sort of authority and so on. And these are networks. Now, the problem of networks is that they go beyond borders. Of course, you can limit the network. In other words, you can say, our network will only, you know, be sort of compatible with other networks on our territory and not, you know, on the other side. For instance, Imperial Russia and Spain decided that the gauge of their railroad would be different, would be larger than the gauge of, you know, the rest of Europe. But that obviously is a big problem when you want to trade. It prevents or makes more difficult to invade the country, but it prevents goods or makes it more difficult for goods to enter into the country. Now, if you look at technology prior to networks, you know, if you have a shovel or a wheelbarrow or a musket, it can work all by itself. I can have one wheelbarrow and it will do the job perfectly well. But when you have a fax, a telegraph, a telephone, and a computer terminal, it only works, it's only valuable. A fax machine is totally, you know, useless if you have only one fax machine on the planet. You need everybody to be connected, and more people, and the fax machine or the telex or, you know, into computer terminal and so on, will become ever more valuable as the number of people connected to the network increases. So unless you want to be North Korea and condemn your country to being, you know, lagging, condemn your country to poverty, you need these connections, you need this connectivity. So that is what the big technological change from, you know, the wheelbarrow to networks. But of course, as soon as networks are developed across borders, then the power of the state is diminished, because the state, any state, has to submit to normative institutions that will say what is the compatibility. In other words, a state cannot say mobile phones will work on this frequency and, you know, internet will work like this and so on. You have to accept that all of the states will say together, you know, they will all sort of combine together in order to get, so, you know, a common sort of standard. So you lose some of your authority. Then people will start using these networks in order to develop transnational organizations and entities and movements and so on, which again loosens the grip that the state has on its own population.